All right. Hi, this is Alan Breznick from Light Reading. I'm here with my colleague, Jeff Baumgartner. We're going to talk about what happened yesterday at our Cable Next-Gen Network Architectures Digital Symposium. So, hey, Jeff.
Hey, Alan, how you doing? Good job on day 2 there. So I thought we'd maybe try to wrap up and kind of discuss, some of the topics and things that came up.
Sure.
And I thought, we could start off with Claudio Righetti, at Telecom Argentina. Mm-hmm. And his whole focus was on machine learning, AI, and kind of how it's starting to factor into, what they're doing in a bigger way. Right. I think they were talking a little bit about, keeping tabs on capacity demands and things like that. But, what was kind of some of your takeaways from Claudio's discussion?
Well, what was interesting about Claudio was that he was talking about how Telecom Argentina has actually been trying these things out and actually is planning to roll out both AI and machine learning and also deep learning over the next couple of years. So he was actually talking about some of the benefits as well as some of the challenges of getting there. But it seems like they're pretty well along the way, which was interesting to hear because we haven't heard a lot. We've heard a lot about what the potential benefits of these things are, but we haven't really heard about a provider actually making a lot of use of it so far.
Yeah, it seemed like they were applying it in a lot of different areas. Not one or two, but pretty good.
Yeah, across the board.
Yep. So good. And then the other discussion with some of the initial panels kind of talking about what's going on in the cable access network right now and what's not going on. There's a lot of activity all of a sudden and a lot of movement in terms of what's going to kind of happen next. We talked about DOCSIS 4.0, we talked about distributed access architecture, virtualization, and so forth. And what I thought was interesting, hearing it come from an operator with Jeff Finkelstein was, even though DOCSIS 3.1, if you pair it with a high split or something to boost the upstream, that, it's going to get you pretty far down the road for a while, gives you a lot of headroom. But, now is not the time to kind of put your feet up and relax and, kind of investing in the network, and to kind of keep things going. So that doesn't sound like anybody's going to be taking a break anytime soon. No breathers yet.
Yeah, it did sound like that. In fact, that was a great line about not putting your feet up to relax. Jeff was talking about still going full speed ahead, going beyond the mid splits and the high splits and all the more node splits and really preparing the networks for DOCSIS 4.0, even if they don't need the capacity just yet. Because he can see it happening by the middle of the decade or beyond. And he even put in a quick shout out for what the next phase of DOCSIS will be, DOCSIS 5.0, which maybe next decade by the time we see that. But it's interesting just to even hear that come up in the conversation.
Right. I think we were all saying we'll all be maybe retired by the time 5.0 comes into the fore.
Yeah. I suspect I will be at least.
Okay. Well, hopefully I will be too. We'll see. But and then, the other thing, they got into it a little bit, I thought, and yesterday, and that is, it seems like all of a sudden remote MacFi is getting a lot of, it's kind of like being woven into the discussion a lot more as, a near-term reality now. Because I remember people were talking about it several years ago, and everyone was more interested. The initial deployment was remote PHY, but it just feels like it's building a lot of momentum, especially with Cable Labs putting the flexible Mac architecture specs out there.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of momentum behind it, and a lot more excitement about it right now, and the Cable Labs coming out with the new standard seems to be sort of the capstone that's really making it happen now, because we're just hearing a lot more talk about remote MacFi and the benefits of that and how that's the ultimate goal. And we're hearing it from the vendors too. I mean, we've gotten a couple of briefings recently that we can't talk about yet from a couple of vendors that are coming out with remote MacFi devices, and we'll be showing them off at SCT next week.
Right. Yeah, and then DAA, though, I mean, even though the pandemic kind of slowed down some of that activity, it doesn't appear to have taken it to complete stop. Right? I think Jeff, again with Cox, did provide some numbers. They've been doing DAA for a few years, but he did throw out some numbers, like 3,000 remote Fi devices out there serving about 1 million customers. I mean, that's
right.
To me, is that's definitely scale. That's not onesie twosies. I mean, that's kind of a big deployment, I thought.
Yeah, that's a significant number. They've been doing this very quietly. I think a couple operators have been doing it pretty quietly. Shaw's been doing it. Liberty Global's been doing it. They're just not, and I assume Comcast is doing it, but they're just not talking about it much yet, which is interesting. But yeah, they're getting it out there. On the other hand, we're hearing forecasts. We heard a new forecast yesterday from Jamie Lenderman from Omdia, who was saying that DAA is still going slower than expected at this point, and she blamed the pandemic for that.
Right. Yeah, and it was interesting to kind of get some of the feedback from the operators about that line of thinking, right? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, they don't want to say, they've put the brakes on anything like that, but just kind of like, oh, well, you kind of have to reassess some things. Things have never truly stopped, but they definitely have slowed down during this period. I mean, that's just right. And speaking of Jamie, she did give us some thoughts about when DOCSIS 4.0 is going to become a thing, a reality from a deployment point. Even though some thoughts that maybe some prototypes for 4.0 will start to surface next year, but her expectation was what, maybe middle of the decade
before we start seeing some real action there.
Yeah. So I mean, there's like this at least 5-year window where operators are really going to be leaning on DOCSIS 3.1 and doing mid splits, high splits, and that's going to get them quite a bit time down the road. So so it sounds like they got some time to kind of figure this out for what's going to come next. Then even further out, there was a lot of talk about virtualization, right? Even though we've got virtual CCAP, is out there, but kind of virtualizing the whole network seems to be further out on the horizon. Right. So our gentleman from Red Hat seems to be says seeing a lot of virtual CCAP, but stuff beyond that's kind of in the labs, and he's getting a lot of questions about it.
And Rob Wilmoth from Red Hat and Jeff Finkelstein both had something to say about that, but it's definitely still a longer term out. There seems to be a debate as to whether virtualization has to be part of DAA or whether it can be done separate from DAA. Do they necessarily have to be joined at the hip, or can you do them separately? And it seems like operators like Comcast are doing it at the same time, where other operators are doing one and then the other, but not doing necessarily joining them together.
Right. And just from a timing is everything perspective, it was interesting to see Comcast kind of come out with an announcement, the same day, our event happened to be going on. And that is, they were doing this trial in Jacksonville,
right?
A technical milestone toward, the path to, 10G as the industry calls it, where they're going to start doing, or they're testing 1.25 gigabits per second symmetrical on HFC with a high split, up to 204, which I thought was kind of interesting too. They're definitely in that full duplex DOCSIS camp. Yet, this trial, is more traditional.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that was your second 10G trial story in like 2 weeks, right? Because you did a Mediacom story 2 weeks earlier. So there's definitely something bubbling up now with 10G trials and action happening there. Yeah,
the Mediacom thing was they had the 10G smart home.
Right.
It's kind of similar. It was kind of like a DOCSIS 3.1 plus, sort of
Right.
approach, again, with, a high split and, just kind of showing, hey, even with the technology that's out there today and the products out there, here's what we can do on the HFC plant. And again, so this whole 10G thing is kind of, being discussed now in kind of step functions toward that goal. So,
right. Yeah, it's interesting because we thought before that operators had to go to DOCSIS 4.0 in order to reach the 10G goal, but it looks now like there's more and more emphasis on taking DOCSIS 3.1 and doing some quicker and dirtier things to the plant that will get you up to 10G without having to get it totally ready for DOCSIS 4.0 and launch DOCSIS 4.0.
Yeah, the way I'm kind of looking at it, it just seems like 3.1 will help get them to kind of that 1 gig goal standpoint. Obviously, maybe above that for sure.
Right.
Yeah, 4.0 will kind of get them to get across that line, at least from an HFC standpoint.
Right.
10G also includes fiber to the prem and wireless, kind of this agnostic approach. So, and then speaking of wireless, there was a whole keynote and panel tied into the 5G topic, right? So yeah, who's with Liberty Latin America now, right? So what was his update on what they're doing in that area?
But his message was that 5G is, as he kept saying, is awesome. He thinks it's a great technology. But after he set that out there, he then went through all the hoops and that operators have to go through, they have to jump through in order to make 5G a reality. And so he and basically came down to having enough spectrum to be able to do 5G properly. And he says that a lot of operators who are doing 5G actually don't have enough spectrum to be able to do the kinds of speeds over those longer distances that make 5G an actually superior technology to 4G. So they have big plans, but I don't, especially in Latin America. But at this point, it sounds like it's more enhancing 4G than actually going up to 5G.
And then you had a panel, and it was I think Tim was on there as well. But it kind of was on again on this theme of 5G being friend or foe to the cable industry, and I think from a fixed wireless standpoint, I mean there's some possible threats in there, but it just feels like there's a lot more opportunity for the industry to support 5G either with backhaul or to actually use it yourself. Extend the plant into some areas that versus having to build fiber further out or connecting to a wireline network.
Yeah, 5G may end up being like the latest in the long list of cable threats that we've listed over the last 50 years. It turned out to be not so much of a threat after all. Definitely operators are looking to make use of 5G, and we've seen even some of the smaller operators looking to do fixed wireless. I mean, we've heard it like from Schurz and a couple others, smaller players. Cable One, and Charter has big plans to extend their reach with 5G to their areas, and that shows in some of the cable operators being big bidders for the CBRS spectrum a month or so ago, right? Charter, Cox, and Comcast all one big swaths of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think that it just kind of shows that the quote unquote cable industry is not the same industry as it was. I mean, it's really a agnostic from the access network at some point in a lot of areas, but and that kind of feeds into the broader network convergence story that is developing.
Right.
And I think the guy, the keynoter that kind of capped the day. We had Shane Portfolio with us again from Comcast, and expanded on this concept of one network, versus kind of looking at, oh, you have the HFC silo, you got the FTTP silo, you got wireless. The idea is like, hey, how do you take that all together into one comprehensive operational network? And it definitely feeds into the discussion on virtualization and trying to kind of level that out or tie it all together.
Right. Yeah. Shane was focusing more on the effects on the Comcast staff and on the team, but he did put out some interesting numbers, or at least percentages, of how much of their plant that they have now introduced virtualization to, how much in terms of virtual head ends that they've introduced, and where they stand with a little bit with fiber deep and with DAA. So they're clearly covering large parts of their major metro areas now, particularly in the West. So it'll be interesting to see when they actually will share some stats on how far they've gotten with all that and what kind of benefits they're seeing.
Yeah, and he also talked about like the effects of all this on, this transformation on the workforce.
Right.
Just kind of like, hey, there's some people who made incredible contributions over the years, and maybe aren't going to be quite tied into this next phase. So you have kind of a group like that, but you have a lot of people who are earlier into their career that are going to be all in on this. So it's just another the people aspect of what you're doing. It's not just all about the technology.
Yeah, and it was impressive that he said that 80% of the company's employees are enthusiastic about staying and pursuing the transformation. So that's a pretty good retention rate. The other 20% are looking to retire out at this point, but if they're keeping 4/5 of their workforce who really want to do this next phase, that's a pretty good sign for them.
Right. Great. Yeah. So a lot of ground covered. Yes. Right. And then next week we're going to get another heavy dose of what's going on in this arena with
Cable Tech Expo. Yeah.
Cable Tech Expo going on, all virtual. So you and I have to compare notes and try to divide and conquer next week.
Sure, absolutely. I'm with you.
All right. Thanks, Alan.
All right. Take care, Jeff.
Yeah, you too.